This is the video for the Try It section of Lesson 23, Managing External Data. In this lesson, you create a web query to import a display of the current day and time for several North American time zones. In this lesson, you'll access a website to the United States Naval Observatory where the day and time are recorded on the master clock of the United States Navy. Back in the day, long before the so-called modern era, when communication was nothing like it is these days, it was no small task for countries in different parts of the world to agree on what time it was and what day of the week it was. Now that the times and time zones and days of the week are pretty much understood around the world, there still is a need to maintain and manage the time. So the U.S. Naval Observatory Master Clock Time produces timing for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Department of Defense, and if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. I came up with this idea for this lesson because a few years ago, actually, I was asked by a client to create a project for them, and one of the restrictions in the project was that data could only be entered or deleted during certain days of the week and certain times of the day. And that restriction was being circumvented by some of the workbooks users by them changing their own computer's internal time clock or date, which you could do on your computer and almost anybody can do on theirs. So what I needed to do was find a way where an independent source was what the actual time was being verified for my workbook, and therefore I came across this particular website from the U.S. Navy, and that was how I was able to solve the problem of these people who didn't want to follow all the rules, and so I needed to come up with this time zone restriction enforcement, and that was how I did it. I got into the Navy's master clock. So to get into the Visual Basic Editor, click the Developer tab in the ribbon and the Visual Basic icon, or you could press the Alt F11 keys and click Insert Module, because we're going to create a new macro here, and I'm going to call the macro Time After Time. I'm going to open up a with structure for the destination worksheet. The worksheet we're going to put the results of the web query on is going to be on sheet 1, but because we're going to be referencing it so many times in our code, rather than having to keep repeating what I'm typing now, I'm going to enter in a with structure for that. And I am going to declare a string type variable for the website that is where this clock and the data is that we're going to be writing a web query for. I'm going to say dim strurl as string. Of course, it's a string type of data that we're going to be having, which is the website address. strurl equals, I'm going to put a line continuation character in here because this is a fairly long website address that I've copied and pasted elsewhere, so I didn't have to take so much time here typing it in. So that is the address of the website, and for consistency, I prefer to activate the worksheet that will receive the web data. Now, I mentioned this in an earlier lesson, and I'm going to say it again, that I know by now it's been drummed into your head to not activate worksheets, cells, ranges, objects unless you have to. And in this case, I prefer to activate the worksheet that the web query is going to produce the results on. And so to do that, I'm going to say application.goto. I'm going to use the goto method. And because we're inside of this with structure here for sheet 1, all I need to do is type dot range A1, and the optional scroll argument I'm going to set to true, meaning that cell A1 will definitely be the upper leftmost cell that will be in the window. So that will be a good way for us to make sure that we go right to cell A1 of sheet 1 if this macro happens to be called from a sheet other than sheet 1. I'm going to clear the cells in the worksheet so that I know that the data being imported will not be confused with other data that might already be on the worksheet, having been maybe imported previously and not yet deleted. So I'm going to say cells.clear. And now I'm going to open up a with structure for the add method of our new query table. Now what I'm going to do here is the query table is going to go onto sheet 1, so I'm going to type this in very quickly, and the dot here is in response to worksheet sheet 1. We're still going to say now that we're going to add a query table to sheet 1, and where we're going to add it has to do with this connection method that we need to build. We're going to build a connection here, and the connection will be, and it's a funny looking line of code, I will grant you that, because I do have to put the words URL in here and a semicolon. Now I'm going to close this literal string here and concatenate that with the strURL variable name that is the website. So I'm going to say and strURL, that's the website, and a comma, and I have to specify the destination of this web query result, which will be A1. Why not? Now this is still a nested with structure going on here with the add method of query table, and we do have to set some properties a certain way, and you will get to be more accustomed to these as you work with query tables more if you do. One of them that I know, because I've tested this to make sure, and I wanted to make sure it worked in the lesson, of course, the background query property needs to be set to true. And the tables only from HTML we are going to set to false. Now what that would have done is to give us some extra data in the sheet that we would not have needed. It would only have confused the issue. All we're going to care about, as you will see from the table that gets extracted, is a nice set of data that shows the day and time of different time zones. That's what we want. Had we had this other HTML stuff, it would have just added more to the table that we didn't need. And there is a refresh method that I'm going to make sure the background query again that I had already set to true does not need to be refreshed again, so I'm going to set it to false here. And I found out that this innocent looking property here, save data equals true, is very important, so I'm going to put that in here as well, and I'm going to close the with structure for this query tables being added. I'm still in the with structure of this sheet 1 object, so I'm going to also say end with, and there is the macro that produces a table that we're going to get from this website here, commanded from this query table that we have built here. I'm going to press Alt-Q to come back to the worksheet, and although this macro could be run from any sheet because we put the goTo method into our code to come to sheet 1, as long as we're on sheet 1 now, I'm going to click the macros icon from the developer tab, or I could have pressed the Alt F8 keys on the keyboard. There's the time after time macro that we have built. I'm going to click the Run button, and this produces the current day and time of when I actually am recording this video. And here is this set of data for these different time zones here in North America. And that's just one example of how to compose a query table to extract information. I'm going to come back to the VBE here. To extract information from a particular website and putting it where you want it with some of the parameters that, as you get more accustomed to query tables, you will know are important and that you need to include in your code. And that is how you will create a table and execute your query code.